It's The Log. I'm Charles Purcell. Here's what we're going to do today. We need to revisit Greta Thunberg's UN speech because there's a problem. Thunberg is demanding bold and immediate action from the very people most incapable of providing it. As social critic Chris Hedges writes this week, saving the planet means overthrowing the ruling elites. Now, if that's true, and I'm going to make the case that it is, then it's up to you and it's up to me to take bold and immediate action. For us to just cheer her on, admire her, call her a hero, is to use her word, empty, unless and until we act. So let's figure this out today. Here she is, climate activist Greta Thunberg, speaking at this past week's UN Climate Action Summit.
This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you? For more than 30 years, the science has been crystal clear. How dare you continue to look away and come here saying that you're doing enough when the politics and solutions needed are still nowhere in sight? You say you hear us and that you understand the urgency. But no matter how sad and angry I am, I do not want to believe that. Because if you really understood the situation and still kept on failing to act, then you would be evil, and that I refuse to believe. The popular idea of cutting our emissions in half in 10 years only gives us a 50% chance of staying below 1.5 degrees and the risk of setting off irreversible chain reactions beyond human control. 50% may be acceptable to you, but those numbers do not include tipping points, most feedback loops, additional warming hidden by toxic air pollution, or the aspects of equity and climate justice. They also rely on my generation sucking hundreds of billions of tons of your CO2 out of the air with technologies that barely exist. So a 50% risk is simply not acceptable to us, we who have to live with the consequences. To have a 67% chance of staying below a 1.5 degrees of global temperature rise, the best odds given by the IPCC, the world had 420 gigatons of CO2 left to emit back on January 1st, 2018. Today, that figure is already down to less than 350 gigatons. How dare you pretend that this can be solved with just business as usual and some technical solutions? With today's emissions levels, that remaining CO2 budget will be entirely gone within less than 8.5 years. There will not be any solutions or plans presented in line with these figures here today, because these numbers are too uncomfortable and you are still not mature enough to tell it like it is. You are failing us. But the young people are starting to understand your betrayal. The eyes of all future generations are upon you. And if you choose to fail us, I say we will never forgive you. We will not let you get away with this. Right here, right now, is where we draw the line. The world is waking up, and change is coming whether you like it or not. Thank you.
She's talking to us. She's talking to me. She's talking to you. She's not just talking to a room full of people at the United Nations. She's talking to you. She's talking to me. How dare we, indeed, how dare we listen to this child and be inspired and be moved to tears as I was, and I'm sure you were as well. If you weren't moved to tears, I'm not sure what your deal is. But how dare we treat Greta Thunberg as just another celebrity, as another face on the television screen, along with all the others. Do not fall into that trap. We listen to those words and we're suddenly filled with hope. What a wonderful, beautiful person this is. Isn't it great how she and her entire generation are going to change the world? She's given us hope for the future. If that's what you're taking away from this, then you are dead wrong and you're not hearing her message. She's talking to us. How dare we treat her like a savior? She's a child. We must act. If we listen to those words, and if we get all choked up, and if we share those words on our social media, and we declare ourselves in alliance with Greta Thunberg, and make her our hero, but then we go right back to our lives and live them the same way we lived them yesterday, then we are not hearing those words. We're not getting the point. Don't just make her another celebrity who's in the news cycle for a little while and then she's gone. And we move on to whatever's next. Whatever is going to inspire us or make us cry or make us feel great, make us feel hopeful. Screw our feelings. She's demanding action. She's demanding action from us. We're living in this world, this fairy tale of eternal economic growth, as she puts it. And that's what it is. Are we willing to sacrifice anything? Our conveniences, our comfort, our consumer goods? And by the way, why are these people applauding her? They should be sitting in stone silence. They are being shamed, and rightfully so. How dare they applaud and whoop and holler? Those are not applause lines. Some people are hearing the name Greta Thunberg for the very first time this week. Some maybe for a week or two or a month, or the last month or two maybe they've heard that name. Nobody knew the name a year ago. And now suddenly she's a world celebrity. And she's on talk shows and news programs. And she's the latest big thing. And she's in our social feed. And she's in our queue. Right next to whatever else you're going to watch. You're going to watch the football game or the Emmy Awards or some other ridiculousness. Do not tell me that she is your hero and then go back to your life unchanged. How dare we? Indeed. She and the millions of children who marched last week for the climate strike. Some of us joined them. Good. But they are children. They are demanding action. They are doing everything they can. Greta Thunberg is doing everything she can. If you sit back in your easy chair and enjoy all of the benefits that eternal economic growth brings to you, then you're doing nothing that she asks. She doesn't want you to be inspired. She doesn't want you to be hopeful. She doesn't want your praise. She and the millions of children around the world who are protesting are demanding action. And how dare we adults praise them and then not take that action? Either you believe in the science or you don't. And for the moment, I'm going to assume that you do. So I'm asking you right now, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about your lifestyle? What are you going to do about your activism? What are you going to do as a citizen? What responsibility are you going to take? When it comes to personal action, some things are simple and some things not so simple. The simple things, you don't need me to tell you. Join these children in the streets. Join them in the protests. Vote for candidates who will take action in the halls of power that will make a difference. Vote with your feet, with your dollar. Look at your own consumption. Look at your own contribution to this crisis. Learn the issue. Understand the connection between your life, the way you live it, the way you consume, the way you vote, and how that consumption and how those votes either contribute to the problem or contribute to the solution. As the old protest song goes, which side are you on? Having hope and getting a lump in your throat because of this beautiful child, it's not enough. That's not what she wants from us. That's not what the situation requires of us. If you're just sitting in front of your screen deciding who to love and who to hate, I'll confess, I shared that picture of her glaring at Trump. I did take great pleasure in that. But if any of us thinks that's enough, our own personal feelings, our own personal philosophies, our own personal political alliances that we share with friends at the bar or family around the table or with friends on social media, if that's the full extent of our response, then shame on us. How dare we? The solutions go far beyond a 2 or 3 day news cycle and a provocative 5-minute speech and a laugh out loud moment when Greta Thunberg glares at Agent Orange. The climate crisis and species extinction requires of us 2 fronts that should not be in competition. And they, of course, are personal lifestyle, which we keep being told is not enough, and it's not, because the other front is wholesale, structural, political, economic, social reversal of current practices on a global scale. The kinds of things we do need lawmakers to enact, nations to agree upon, corporations to be forced through law and mandate. This is the work of adults, not of children. They are calling us out, and we need to respond appropriately. And with that in mind, Chris Hedges. Here's a name you should also know if you don't already. Chris Hedges is a Truthdig columnist. Truthdig. If you don't currently subscribe to Truthdig, you really ought to. Chris Hedges is a Truthdig columnist, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, a New York Times best-selling author, a professor in the college degree program offered to New Jersey State prisoners by Rutgers University. He's an important voice. I highly recommend Chris Hedges. So what I'd like to do next is read you his article, especially in the context of hearing Greta Thunberg's words. I'd like to read to you his article, Saving the Planet Means Overthrowing the Ruling Elites. So, Chris Hedges. Friday's climate strike by students across the globe will have no more impact than the mass mobilizations by women following the election of Donald Trump or the hundreds of thousands of protesters who took to the streets to denounce the Iraq War. This does not mean these protests should not have taken place. They should have. But such demonstrations need to be grounded in the bitter reality that in the corridors of power, we do not count. If we lived in a democracy, which we do not, our aspirations, rights, and demands, especially the demand that we confront the climate emergency, would have an impact. We would be able to vote representatives into power in government to carry out change. We would be able to demand environmental justice from the courts. We would be able to divert resources to the elimination of carbon emissions. Voting, lobbying, petitioning, and protesting to induce the ruling elites to respond rationally to the climate catastrophe have proved no more effective than tuberculosis victims' appeals to Henry VIII to cure them with a royal touch. The familiar tactics employed over the past few decades by environmentalists have been spectacular failures. In 1900, the burning of fossil fuel, mostly coal, produced about 2 billion tons of carbon dioxide a year. That number had risen threefold by 1950. Today, the level is 20 times higher than the 1900 figure. During the last decade, the increase in CO2 was 100 to 200 times faster than what the Earth experienced during the transition from the last ice age. On May 11, the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii recorded 415.26 parts per million of CO2 in the air. It's believed to be the highest concentration since humans evolved. We will embrace a new paradigm for resistance or die. The ruling elites and the corporations they serve are the principal obstacles to change. They cannot be reformed. And this means revolution, which is what Extinction Rebellion seeks in calling for an international rebellion on October 7, when it will attempt to shut down city centers around the globe in acts of sustained mass civil disobedience. Power has to be transferred into our hands. And since the elites won't give up power willingly, we will have to take it through nonviolent action. Protests can be the beginning of political consciousness, but they can also be empty political theater. They can be used to celebrate our moral integrity. Advertisements, especially in the age of social media, for ourselves. They can be a boutique activism in which protesters allow themselves to be funneled through police barricades and arrests are politely choreographed, resulting in a few hours in jail and the credentialing of the demonstrators as radicals. They can be used to distance ourselves from a repugnant political figure such as Donald Trump, while leaving us silent and complicit when the same policies are carried out by a supposed progressive such as Barack Obama. This is a game the state has learned to play to its advantage. As long as we do not disrupt the machine, as long as we protest according to their rules, the elites will let us march through the streets of Washington in pussy hats or walk out of school for a day. When power is threatened, as it was in the sustained protests during the Occupy encampments and at Standing Rock, the ruling elites react very differently. They employ the full weight of the surveillance state to demonize the protesters, arrest and detain the leadership, and infiltrate agents, provocateurs, to carry out violent assaults, to justify the use of the police and security forces to shut the protests down. Preemptive efforts by the security forces to harass and thwart Extinction Rebellion's planned October occupation of city centers, an action designed to negatively affect commerce and bring parts of major cities to a standstill, have already begun. Roger Hallam, the co-founder of Extinction Rebellion, was arrested September 14th and charged with attempting to cause a disruption at Heathrow Airport by using a drone. Hallam has called Heathrow, which climate activists say emits 18 million tons of carbon dioxide a year, more than the total emissions of 118 countries, a crime against humanity. He and other activists have vowed to halt the airport's plan to build a third runway. Hallam's case will be heard at the Isleworth Crown Court on October 14, meaning he will not be released until after the October 7 protests. In addition, other Extinction Rebellion organizers, including Andrew Medhurst, have been arrested in England, and police have seized their phones and computers. It does not matter who is the public face of the corporate state. This is not about political personalities. It was Obama, after all, who oversaw a coordinated national effort to eradicate the Occupy encampments and place the water protectors at Standing Rock under siege. Obama's environmental policies, despite his lip service to curbing global warming and his support of the non-binding Paris Climate Accord, which the climate scientist James Hansen called a fraud, were appalling. U.S. oil production rose every year he was in office, an increase of 88%. It was the largest domestic increase in oil production in American history. Obama opened offshore drilling to American oil companies as if he were Sarah Palin. Quote, "American energy production, you wouldn't always know it, but it went up every year I was president," Obama told an audience at Rice University last year. Quote, "Suddenly America's like the biggest oil producer. That was me, people." Democrats, like Republicans, serve corporate power. They will not end government subsidies for the fossil fuel industry and the extraction industries. They will not impose carbon taxes to keep fossil fuels in the ground. They will not limit overconsumption. The technologies they invest in, fracking, hybrid cars, genetically modified food, are designed to maintain or expand consumption levels, not reduce them. They will not redirect the trillions of dollars and scientific and technical expertise from the military and corporations towards saving us from environmental catastrophe. The rhetoric and gimmicks they use to placate the public, from carbon credits to wind turbines and solar panels, are, as the scientist James Lovelock says, the equivalent of 18th century doctors attempting to cure serious diseases with leeches and mercury. The creation of ever more complex bureaucratic and technocratic systems in an age of diminishing resources is a characteristic of dying civilizations. Civilizations, in their final phase, frantically search for new methods of exploitation rather than adapt to a changing environment. They repress and exploit the lower classes with greater and greater ruthlessness to maintain the insatiable appetites among the elites for power, luxury, and hedonism. The worse things get, the more the elites retreat into their private enclaves. The more out of touch the elites become, the more catastrophe is assured. This self-defeating process degrades the ecosystem until catastrophic systems collapse. The ruling elites, trained in business schools and managerial programs, are not equipped to confront the existential problems caused by climate catastrophe. They are trained to maintain, no matter the cost, the systems of global capitalism. They are systems managers. They lack the intellectual capacity and imagination to search for solutions outside the narrow parameters of global capitalism. Those living in the global south are already suffering and dying from the effects of global warming, for which the wealthy industrialized nations of the global north bear most of the responsibility. The richest 0.54%, or 42 million people across the world, are responsible for more emissions than the poorest half of the global population, or 3.8 billion people. These elites are sacrificing the poorest on the planet first as they work up the social and economic hierarchy to extinguish us all. We have to let go of our relentless positivism, our absurd mania for hope, our naive belief that with grit and determination we can solve all problems. We have to face the bleakness before us. We live in a world already heavily damaged by global warming, which will inevitably get worse. Refusal to participate in the further destruction of the planet means a rupture with traditional politics. It means non-cooperation with authority. It means defying in every non-violent way possible consumer capitalism, militarism, and imperialism. It means adjusting our lifestyle to thwart the forces bent upon our annihilation. And it means waves of sustained civil disobedience until the machine is broken. The biosphere, including the Amazon rainforest, the oceans, and the polar ice caps, is visibly deteriorating. Heat waves are crippling Europe, Australia, and the American Southwest. Floods devastate the Midwest. Last week, Southeast Texas suffered heavy flooding and deaths when it was hit by the 7th wettest tropical cyclone in U.S. history, with some areas receiving more than 40 inches of rainfall within 3 days. Monster hurricanes ravaged the Caribbean and the shores of the United States. Wildfires consumed the forest of the West Coast. But despite the tangible signs of a climate emergency, the elites continue to assure us we can live as we have always lived. The mathematical models for the future of the planet have 3 devastating trajectories. 1. A massive die-off of perhaps 70% of the human population, and then an uneasy stabilization. 2. Extinction of humans and most other species. 3. An immediate and radical reconfiguration of human society to protect the biosphere and make it more diverse and productive. This third scenario, which most scientists admit is unlikely, is dependent on a halt to the production and consumption of fossil fuels, converting to a plant-based diet to destroy the animal agriculture industry, almost as large a contributor to greenhouse gases as the fossil fuel industry, and greening the deserts and restoring rainforests. We know what we have to do if our children are to have a future. The only question left is, how do we empower leaders who will save us? Climate scientists warn that we will soon reach a tipping point when the biosphere becomes so degraded, no effort to save the ecosystem will halt runaway climate change. We may already be there. The tipping point, many believe, is a further increase in global temperatures of 2 degrees Celsius. At that point, feedback loops will see environmental catastrophes exacerbate each other. We must embrace a new radicalism. We must carry out sustained civil disobedience to disrupt the machinery of exploitation, even as we prepare for the inevitable dislocations and catastrophes ahead. We must alter our lifestyles and consumption to cut our personal carbon footprints. And we must organize to replace existing structures of power with ones capable of coping with the crisis before us. It's The Log. I'm Charles Purcell. So we played you the short Greta Thunberg speech at the UN Climate Summit, and then read to you that full article by Chris Hedges on Truthdig. Let's go over some of the highlights of that and add some thoughts here. Protesting. The climate strike we just had last week, and protests in general. I agree with Chris Hedges. Yes, do it. Participate. They're not enough, but do them anyway. Protests alone, at this point, will not do the trick because we do not live in a democracy. Let's just be clear about that right now. If we lived in a democracy, we could have large protests with millions of people showing up. We could write to our representatives. We could make phone calls, and we would have an impact, because that's how democracies work. But we are not currently living in a democracy, and if you operate on that assumption, well, then you are just spinning your wheels. So according to Chris Hedges, at this point, protests really are about consciousness raising. That's kind of all they're good for right now. But that's not to dismiss them. That's an important thing. So yes, continue to protest. Good old-fashioned marching in the streets, carrying signs, chanting, what do we want, and when do we want it? We want it now, of course. But don't think for a minute that that's actually going to make a change in the decisions that lawmakers make. There's no getting around it. We need lawmakers. As much as I am a small d Democrat and I believe in democracy, and I have in the past described myself as a social anarchist, which is a little dangerous because people don't understand the term, and let's not get all into that. But I'm not a full-out anarchist where I say, well, we don't need laws at all. No, I'm kind of old-fashioned in that way. Yeah, a representative democracy, I'm fine with that. I'm very traditional in that sense. Democratically elected representatives who write and enforce the laws as determined by the will of the people, that's all fine, that's great. But we do not live in a democracy. So, we've got a couple things to do. While we're working on creating that democracy, we can't wait for things like solutions to the climate crisis, and that's what we're talking about today. We can't have a long-term plan about government reform and campaign finance reform and things like that. All those things are good, and all of them are important. But no, we have a crisis right in front of our noses right now in the moment. As Hedges points out, and I've pointed out several times, carbon emissions are actually on the rise. Since implementation of the Paris Climate Accord, CO2 levels are actually up. So obviously something's not working here. Hedges says we need, quote, a new paradigm for resistance. And I agree with Chris Hedges. Mass civil disobedience. Nonviolent, always nonviolent. The current ruling elites are simply not capable. And by ruling elites, I don't want to use some little buzzword here that people can attach their own meaning to. It's a very simple concept. Power right now lies in the hands of billionaires and corporate interests, and elected officials are bought and sold. I know this sounds a little cliche. Forgive me, but it's true. I can't help the fact that it's true. Every once in a great while, a cliche is true. So this new paradigm for resistance, again, nonviolent, mass civil disobedience. It's got to be more than just a protest in a park that you get a permit for. No, it's blocking highways, It's shutting down the system. October 7th is another big day. Extinction Rebellion promoting October 7 as a day of international rebellion. Nonviolent civil disobedience. Shut the mother down. Block highways. Occupy buildings. Fill the lobbies and the hallways of corporate headquarters, of government buildings. Shut everything down. We have to get beyond what Hedges calls celebrating moral integrity. In other words, we say all the right things on social media. We even maybe go to our local protest. We write letters to our representatives and we make phone calls, and it makes us feel good. But again, until we live in a democracy, none of that is going to actually accomplish anything. The only thing that it accomplishes is it makes us feel good. It does nothing. It puts you in the right camp, and you get a little rush from this, and you feel good. That's understandable. You should feel good. But don't be a sucker. Don't let yourself believe that that's actually making any difference. It's not. It raises consciousness? Sure. Okay, that's good. That's one small step. An important step? Certainly not enough. As he says, we can no longer afford to protest according to their rules. Okay, well, there's your protest area over there, and here's your permit. Very good. Thanks. Have a nice little event. No. What's his phrase? Disrupt the machine. That's what we have to do. Now, we have to go into this with open eyes, because the powers that be will use violence against us. That's going to happen. I hope you know by now the history of the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King, one of the ways they prepared, they told the people in those churches, listen, violence will be used against you, and here's how you respond nonviolently. So yeah, you got to do that. And there again, that's where organizing comes in. You actually get people face to face together in a room, and you talk about these things, and you organize, and you strategize, and you support. It's got to go beyond your Facebook post. Because to disrupt the machine, to negatively affect commerce, there will be pushback, and it likely will be violent. There's going to have to be enough of us willing to face that down. What are you willing to do? How far are you willing to go to fight these crimes? And that's what they are. They're crimes against humanity. We're talking about the climate crisis today. Humanitarian crimes. They are nothing less. Ecocide. Nothing less. And so I'm tossing out all of my little cute hyperbole today. I'm not trying to be funny. Often I use on the show, I use hyperbole. I exaggerate to make a point. I've been known to use parody and satire. I'm not doing any of that today. It's all very straightforward today. None of this, every word out of my mouth is maybe inspired by Greta Thunberg. It just is what it is today. Another quote I grabbed from that Hedges article. This is not about political personalities. And this gets back to a little bit what I was saying earlier about turning Greta Thunberg into this celebrity. Sure, be inspired by her, but act. Don't get caught up in political personalities, and that includes Greta Thunberg, as much as I admire her. To just put her in this cast of characters that is somehow entertaining you. Some you love, some you hate, and it becomes one big soap opera, and we're all just entertained by it. Or kind of a sports competition where we genuinely get excited when our team is doing well, and we get angry when the other team seems to be beating us for a while. And yeah, we're very emotionally invested. It really feels real. But leave that for the Packer game. It's fun. I enjoy it. There's nothing wrong with it. But when we start treating real life like that, there's a problem. Now, speaking of teams, Hedges will often, I've been reading him for years, he'll often put Republicans and Democrats in the same boat. And I understand why he does that, and for the most part I agree with him, but not all the way. So, for example, in the current 2020 presidential race, we got all these Democrats vying for the nomination. I don't think there's anything wrong with you voting for a Democrat. I don't put any of the Democrats in the same boat as Agent Orange, or really the entire Republican Party right now, which Noam Chomsky designates as the most dangerous enterprise on the planet. Speaking of hyperbole, that is not hyperbole. That is his honest opinion, and I completely agree. Also, please don't roll your eyes when Hedges uses a phrase like the system of global capitalism. Oh, radical lefty. No, it's just a fact that we live under a system of global capitalism. And as he points out, the global north is sticking it to the global south, where only about 0.5% of the world's population is responsible for more emissions than the poorest half of the population, which is almost 4 billion. This is not hyperbole. This is not radicalism. These are just simple truths. So, non-cooperation with authority, that's where we have to be. We have to defy consumer capitalism, militarism, materialism, sustained civil disobedience. That's the only thing that's going to get us there. And again, the two fronts: adjust our own lifestyle. We've got to change the way we do everything. We have to completely eliminate fossil fuels from the equation. We have to change the way we get around, transportation. We have to change the way we grow, produce, and consume food. Agribusiness, big ag, the kind of stuff happening in the rainforests of Brazil, where they're clearing the rainforest for enormous corporate ag. That is contributing just as much, or nearly just as much, as fossil fuels. So these are big things. And that's where the civil disobedience comes in. Changing large structural systems, non-cooperation with authority, a reconfiguration of human society. Nothing less will save us from that 2.0 Celsius increase. It was just within a matter of a year or two, even less. First we heard, we have about 50 years to fix this, and then it was 30, and then it was 12. Greta Thunberg says in her UN speech it's down to 8.5 before we reach that mark of no return. When climate systems beyond our control go into this loop effect they're talking about. And then it's all over. So however you look at it, it's not the 50 or 100 years. This has to happen now. It has to happen today. So there's the large structural thing, the global stuff that has to happen. So yes, shut it down, civil disobedience, go after the big boys. Yes. Simultaneously, personal lifestyle choices. Let's talk about that next. It's The Log. I'm Charles Purcell. So let's close up here with some ideas. We've heard from Greta Thunberg and Chris Hedges today, and from Hedges about how we need to organize and fight the oligarchs. But also, he suggests, and I agree, that we have to alter our own lifestyles. We can't fall into that silly trap that some people want to set for us. 100 companies are responsible for the great amount of CO2, so you have no responsibility at all. Well, that's true about the 100 international corporations, but don't for a second think that that relieves us of our responsibilities. So I definitely agree with Hedges that our own personal lifestyles have to change. We cannot live as we have always lived. It can't be done. If and when we are successful with the big structural changes and we resuscitate democracy, then collectively we're going to have to make these decisions anyway. In other words, our lives are going to change one way or another. Either we do it through democracy, and that's really the only way it's going to work ultimately. In the meantime, we do it on our own. I mean, those two options aside, then it's just the end for us, quite literally. So the kind of lifestyle changes we're talking about. Not a lot of this is new. We've done a couple shows, actually, I'd like to refer you to. Let me see here. In July, we did a whole segment on, here it is, the July 12th show, 7/12/19. We did the Climate Solutions quiz, and I really recommend you go back and listen to that. A lot of great information on what individuals and governments and businesses can do. But let's just drop a couple right here. You know what? You don't want to hear this, but don't eat meat. If you can find a local, small, sustainable farmer who's raising cattle for beef in a sustainable way, in a very small, sustainable way, then go ahead. I personally don't think we should eat meat at all for a lot of reasons, but we certainly cannot eat meat the way it's currently produced. No. Large ag has to tumble. That has to go away. So individual lifestyle, you got to get the meat off of your plate. Unless you can show me it came from your small farm neighbor. We got to ditch the car. You can't buy another car. Cars are done. Cars are over. The combustible engine is over. It's just over. Use public transportation. Walk. Do what you have to do. But the car is over. No, these aren't going to be easy. No, I never promised that. Take a look at what you consume. Yes, the 100 international corporations are guilty of the bulk of CO2 emissions. Yes, that's true. But they don't exist in a vacuum. A seller's got to have buyers, right? We are their customers. So you better check out what you're buying. I've advocated for years, and I did, again, vocally a couple shows ago. You got to just boycott pretty much everything. Boycott every corporate product. Every processed food, everything that comes in a plastic package, a universal boycott. I personally have pretty much stopped buying everything. I don't buy anything unless I absolutely need it. I buy the food that I need, and in order to have my basic equipment here in the studio, I haven't had to buy anything for a long time. Microphones last for a long time. I don't remember the last time I actually bought anything. I kind of just get the food I need. Yeah, I still drive a car. Yes, I do. I'm not for a second going to tell you that I'm perfect on all of this. I haven't figured out my life yet where I can get rid of the car. I do have a plan. I'm going to take the early Social Security. You know, it comes in tiers. I'm going to go ahead and pull the trigger on that and take it early. I don't need the extra couple $100 I'll get by waiting. Because, again, I don't buy anything. I don't want anything. I understand the connections between consumption and climate crisis. I don't want anything. I want my basic needs, and that's it. So, yeah, I'm going to quit my main gig. I'm going to keep my side gig. But it's going to cut my driving down to maybe once a week. If I could get it down below that, I'll try. Anyway, let me, what else here? So, where do you live? Where do you live? What kind of a house do you live in? Do you use a lot of energy? We're talking about personal lifestyles here. We can't all live in a nice big house with a nice big yard. The world just doesn't work that way. And the resources of this earth don't work that way. And the only reason you've got that now is because you're able to use that energy. And going back to the North versus South global elites, as my sainted mother used to say, I'll bet you dollars to donuts that there are people listening to me right now that have it pretty nice. You got a big old house, and you got a big old yard, and you got a big old car, and a big old garage, and a big old lawnmower, and you got all sorts of big old stuff. Those days are just over. We can't live like that anymore. So voluntarily surrender that stuff. And as I've said many times, and I'm glad to repeat, it sounds like a sacrifice, but trust me, it's not. You get rid of your crap, you get rid of your gadgets, you get rid of your devices, you get rid of that lifestyle. I swear to God, I promise you, you'll be happier. Cut up your credit cards, cancel your Amazon Prime. You don't need any of it. I tell you, you'll be happier. Let's see, what else? So yeah, where do you live? Not only the house itself, but what's the density? Because in a world that works, we're going to need to increase density. suburbs are going to have to condense into nice little cities. We're going to have to go to a day when there's a nice little city there, and then there's nice country surrounding it, and then you go a while on public transportation, you come to another city. Not these sprawling suburbs. That was the most tragic mistake that humankind ever made, was the suburb. So the old suburbs that do exist, if you have a little bit of a downtown, you got to build up around there. You got to let the rest of it be reclaimed by nature. So what's the density like in your particular town, city, or neighborhood? Where do you work? Same questions here for where do you work. Do you have to commute? Can you walk? Can you bike? Can you take public transportation? And speaking of your work, what kind of work do you do? Look around honestly. Are you working in an enterprise that's helping or hurting? It's doing one or the other. It's doing more harm than good, or it's doing more good than harm. Why don't you assess that honestly? And then once you have, why don't you make a decision? Okay, I'm going to keep my efforts right here. Or nope, I'm going to look for something else. I'm not telling you to walk in tomorrow and quit. I know you have a life to live, and I know you have bills to pay, and you need to put a roof over your head. I understand all this. But I am asking you to make these changes as soon as you can. And if not right away, make a plan. Like my modest little plan. I decided to take the Social Security early rather than later. And then that's an extra 2, 3, 4, 5 years or 6 or 10 years where I'm not dragging myself to a job that's not really doing anybody any good. We're just buying and selling all the time, and we're doing a lot more buying than selling because there are a lot more buyers than sellers. We're going out to eat. We're going to movies. We're doing all this crap. Again, I pretty much don't do any of that. I have friends, and I feel very fulfilled, and I read books, and I enjoy myself. But I don't buy a damn thing. They're not getting my money. Those corporations are not getting my money. Like I said, I got to drive a little bit. I'm paying for some gas, doing things I don't want to do. But I keep it to a bare minimum. And outside of that, I don't buy anything. Believe me, you won't miss it. You will not miss it. We did another show back on, let me see, what's the date on that one? Let me look. July 5th, we did our Drop Everything episode. And we did kind of the World War II comparison, where all the automakers basically just retooled. They stopped making cars for a couple of years. They just shut the places down, they retooled, and they churned out war equipment. I think that's what each one of us has to do. Each individual, each company, each enterprise. Assess what you're doing, and if it's not for the cause, then shut it down and retool. Every automaker right now should shut down and retool and dedicate themselves to low energy, no energy public transportation. Again, if you have a job that's doing more harm than good, you make your exit plan and you get the hell out of there. This is all about climate crisis right now, you guys. It's the only thing. It's the only thing. Of course, politics is still involved. You got to vote. You got to do all that stuff, but that falls into the structural changes. But yeah, take your own individual personal responsibility into those structural changes as well. Yeah, we got to get Agent Orange out of there. We got to get the Republicans out of there. Otherwise, we don't have a chance if they stay in power. But let's keep this personal for a minute. Use the World War II analogy. Drop everything and dedicate yourself to this. I'm not quite sure why people aren't doing it, to be honest. I honestly don't understand. If you're a writer, write about it. If you're an artist, make art about it. If you're a filmmaker, make films about it. If you have a podcast, dedicate your podcast to this topic on a regular basis. If you're a teacher, put it into your lesson plans. If you're a scientist, do the science. Whatever your job, whatever your interest, whatever your hobby, we just need to be all about this for as long as it takes. Retool and dedicate to this. I'm not asking too much. I don't believe I'm asking too much. And so again, Chris Hedges, who I highly recommend, he says we have a two-front attack. We have to organize to replace existing structures of power with an alternative system that's capable of coping with this crisis. And at the same time, we must alter our lifestyles and consumption to cut our own personal carbon footprints. It's up to us. And Greta Thunberg, God bless her heart, is demanding action. Well, I wanted to talk about both Thunberg and Hedges today because Greta Thunberg is looking square in the eyes of the elite, when she sits at the UN and when she glares at Agent Orange. And she says, "How dare you? We demand action." Good, but if you believe Hedges, and I do, the current global elites are incapable. That's where the structural change has to happen. And I think Greta understands that. Now, she's a kid, and I think she understands her own limitations, small as they may be. She's a powerhouse, and she's got her research down and her facts down. But you've noticed that she doesn't cross the line into suggesting what political solutions are needed. She just says they are needed. And you do it, you're the damn adults. So I think Greta is right on point. But here's what I'd like to leave you with. If Greta Thunberg's call is to be answered, it is up to us to answer it. So let's finish by listening to Greta one more time. And this time, listen as though it's just you and her in the room. She's looking right at you.
You all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering, people are dying, entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. For more than 30 years, the science has been crystal clear. How dare you continue to look away and come here saying that you're doing enough when the politics and solutions needed are still nowhere in sight? You say you hear us and that you understand the urgency. But no matter how sad and angry I am, I do not want to believe that. Because if you really understood the situation and still kept on failing to act, then you would be evil, and that I refuse to believe. You are failing us, but the young people are starting to understand your betrayal. The eyes of all future generations are upon you. And if you choose to fail us, I say we will never forgive you. We will not let you get away with this. Right here, right now, is where we draw the line. The world is waking up, and change is coming whether you like it or not.
She's talking to you. What is your answer? This episode of The Log is available right now wherever you find your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, iHeart, YouTube, and the podcast Source. Enter Charles Burcell Presents in the search window. Or best yet, go to charlesburcell.com. There you'll find this and all the other series in the podcast family. Follow, comment, and contact me on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks to our flagship terrestrial station, River West Radio, riverwestradio.com. Theme music composed and performed by Peter Donalds. From the New Arts and Media Studios in Milwaukee, I'm Charles Burcell.